Hi, this is Peter Burris, and welcome to another Wikibon action item. Now, this week, we're going to be focusing our community on AWS reInvent 2018. What do we think is going to happen? Very, very important topic. Last few years, AWS has been the biggest show. This year, more than 50,000 people are expected. There's going to be a lot of AWS announcements, but also a lot of action from the ecosystem. Now, to do that, we've pulled together the Wikibon analyst team, but we've also added a guest analyst, James Urquhart, who is going to help us go through some of the things that we think are going to be especially important at AWS. What's the big picture? What are some of the challenges that AWS faces? Where do we expect to see some of the key announcements? And ultimately, what activities or what actions should users be thinking about as a result? Now, as always, at the end of this video segment, we'll run a crowd chat. And this is going to be your opportunity to ask questions, share your opinions, give us your insights. What do you think is going to be important? And what are you expecting to come out of AWS reInvent? So stay with the video. Let's do the crowd chat afterwards. Thanks very much. It's common to talk about data as the new oil or data as the new currency. And while those are imperfect metaphors, they're nonetheless very relevant and useful in many respects. And we can almost imagine what's going on in the cloud marketplace today as similar to what went on in the oil industry or what has gone on in the banking industry. And that is to get as much of the resource under management as possible. So many years ago, oil companies tried to go out and hoard reserves and get them under management. Banks are constantly trying to get as much capital under management, and they test themselves and evaluate themselves and pay themselves based on how successful they are at increasing their capital stocks. In many respects, we can look at what AWS and other cloud companies are doing today as just that, taking steps to bring as much data under management as possible, because that has a lot of competitive implications that deserve further discussion and have enormous impacts ultimately on how users should approach these different cloud companies.
I think you can really see that effort to pull in data into the AWS realm in a couple of different ways. So first, there's the fact that they don't charge you to bring data in; they do charge you to bring data out. That's a pretty clear sign of what incentives they're trying to set. But I also think if you look at what they're trying to do with their hybrid cloud strategies that they've started to announce with VMware and now with Cisco, and some of the things they're trying to do in the data center in terms of bringing RDS around, some of the network things that they've done, all of those things are really happening because what they want to do is make it as easy as possible to ultimately get data to AWS, even if it's new data generated from old data, or if it's old data being replicated and then eventually living over there. They want to make that, that transition as easy as possible and in as many ways as possible.
The term data gravity has been used by AWS and other vendors as gravity towards it. Data is better if it's close to other data, right in the center. Another view of data is to say that data is created, and it's much more efficient to process the data where it's created, and then you move subsets of that data than it is to move all of that data. A simple example is taking all of the data from a surveillance camera. Why would you want to move that all up into a cloud when you could process that data and get most of the information from it very close to the source of that particular data? And I think that is an area where AWS are going to have to bring innovation. The traditional place for running applications has always been the data center. But as we have heard, there is huge amounts of data coming in at the edges, in particular with IoT, with robotics, with vehicles, etc. And that data is going to be processed, needs to be processed very close to where it is. So the concept of a hybrid application now becomes very interesting and useful. An application which can be run wherever it's needed and run the application itself in real time and also extract data from different locations and bring those to another location for further processing there. So this type of hybrid application is going to have to be able to run both in the center and at the edge. And that has profound implications on the type of cloud architecture that is involved in making that happen. Another development from this whole concept of hybrid applications is that the traditional way of thinking about AI, that all the development or training should happen in the cloud itself, is potentially going to change. It is the data coming in at the edge and using that data as part of that process of retraining and then sending not the whole amount of data, but the subsets of that data to the cloud, which I think makes much more sense, much more cost-effective sense than moving all of that data up into the cloud. So we're going to see a mixed model of both inference being at the edge and also the initial processing of training data will be there as well.
One of the key challenges that every enterprise is going to have to attend to is what do they do with the applications that run their business? Amazon last year at reInvent 2017 made a major messaging push to try to convince companies, enterprises, that they could start migrating their high-value legacy applications into the AWS cloud. There haven't been an enormous number of high-profile examples of that happening. And I think that's because ultimately a lot of enterprises are saying, is there another way of doing this? Can we first, do a better job of virtualizing? Can we keep things in place and have better control of our data? Are there new technologies like converged infrastructure and HCI that could also provide platforms for us to slide our legacy applications over to a more modern environment and have it become more participating in the cloud model? A lot of questions are on the horizon. Ultimately, though, AWS is going to take steps to introduce technologies, put them closer to legacy data that can attract that data like RDA, because that's what they really want, is the data.
One thing that we've seen consistently year after year at reInvent is that Andy comes out on the first keynote day and tells a data story. And it's usually, he announces usually some services around data. He announces some new capabilities, certainly talks to a lot of customers that have benefited from AWS's data story. And I expect to see that. And then Werner comes up with the developer story. The developer saying, so here's the cool tech for developing new things. Here's the new, programming related angles to things. And I think it's a formula that's worked extremely well for them. And it's one that as they transition from being sort of growing a market to competing in a market, that they will take advantage of in new ways, but still follow.
I'd like to talk a little bit about hybrid cloud leadership, even though AWS doesn't use the term that much, if ever. I'm kind of reminded of Splunk, who never used the term big data, but they've emerged as a leader, if not the leader in big data. And here's the thing. I mean, if you look at Amazon's strategy, the partnership with VMware and now Cisco, you see announcements, things like Snowball and Direct Connect. But the real linchpin here is the ecosystem. Everybody wants to utilize Amazon's cloud, S3, for example, as a target. They're writing to that platform. And so you have this hybrid cloud ecosystem developing, bubbling up around them.
I think one of the things we're going to see at AWS reInvent 2018 that we haven't seen at past reInvents is that Amazon Web Services is very likely to respond to Google's cloud in particular, a key initiative at Google, where Google's achieved leadership, which is automated machine learning. Now, last year, AWS came out with SageMaker, its machine learning development tool chain that they've continued to invest deeply in. However, in the last few weeks, actually this past week, Google announced that they have built out a more commercialized AI tool chain of their own. that rides on top of Kubernetes in something called Kubeflow. I strongly expect that AWS will have some announcement related to running SageMaker over Kubernetes to maybe perhaps adopting this Kubeflow technology to show that they remain, AWS, at the forefront of leadership in this arena.
For those that have been watching AWS, serverless has been taking really the front and center of what they've been talking about for the last couple of years. It made a lot of buzz back in 2014 when Lambda was announced, but last year in 2017, it was about much more than just Lambda. Andy Jassy actually said if Amazon was built today, serverless would be underneath everything. So Aurora serverless was announced last year, and over the last year, we've seen more and more services being redesigned. Serverless is underneath, and that's fundamental for how functions will reach out to not only in the cloud, but at the edge and impact everything across the portfolio that Amazon is doing.
Amazon has announced the Snowball, which has processing at the edge, and has announced functions that can be used within that Snowball. However, the Snowball is really a large data storage device for taking stuff up to AWS. And there needs to be a much lower cost way of doing that. And I believe that AWS will be looking at lower cost ways of putting processing at the edge to take advantage of some of these functions. And this is going to be pretty important for IoT in particular, and something that OT people are looking for.
One of the things that we expect to see is, as a result of the enterprise's desire to do multi-cloud, which will include Amazon or AWS in many cases, is we think that there's going to be three vectors of innovation that are going to be required. One, multi-cloud data protection. Two, multi-cloud interoperability and networking. And three, multi-cloud management. And one of the cues that we're looking for at AWS reInvent this year is the degree to which Amazon adds to its capabilities in all three of those domains, data protection, management, and interoperability, but also whether or not Amazon starts reaching out into the ecosystem and putting out feelers for how other cloud services can be bought underneath Amazon's management. Thus far, they haven't really taken that step. Others are thinking about it. Let's see what Amazon does.
AWS has been growing strongly, but if you look at it from an application and specific workload point of view, there are other alternatives that are growing strongly as well. One, for example, is Microsoft with their Azure Stack. It's a cloud-first approach, which is putting everything in the cloud and their applications in the cloud, for example, but also giving the option of pushing those exact same software out into local processing with the Azure Stack. Oracle is taking a similar approach with our Cloud at Customer. It's allowing exactly the same applications and operating system to be pushed down to be local and close to the data that the customer wants to operate on. And in addition, we're seeing very strong growth from Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, and many others internationally, which are adding to the competition that's available, particularly in Europe and the Far East.
Now, what does this mean for users? So on the one hand, you got to have Amazon as part of your hybrid cloud strategy. That's one thing that it says. However, as James is pointing out, Amazon doesn't charge you to get the data in, but they charge you a lot to get the data out. So you really need to think about risk and about exit strategies before you go in too hard.
So I think one of the really cool things that's going on right now is that the cloud is driving an architecture that is a systems architecture, a distributed architecture first and foremost. And while that does create new challenges for IT organizations that are having to deal with security across network boundaries and organizational boundaries, it creates opportunity. It allows you to think about how you want to connect components and where you get those components from, or whether you build them yourself. So you now have more choice in the market in a lot of ways by taking advantage of these architectures. So moving to a systems view of your distributed architectures and thinking more in terms of services and workflows will help you a lot there.
So let's talk about the central tension that users are going to have to address. Amazon wants your data, and they're providing services that make the cloud a very attractive place to put your data. In the future, though, is it going to be possible for you to hold on to your data and acquire Amazon services without giving up the data? Ultimately, users have to decide what data has to remain under their management and which cloud suppliers are willing to provide the high-value, innovative services that heretofore might have been associated or might have required that you move the data to the cloud, and allow you to acquire those services so that you can move it to where you want to put your data. That's probably the central tension in the cloud industry over the next few years. Amazon seems to be going in one direction. Give us your data first, then you get the services. Microsoft and others seem to be going in the other direction. Here's a set of services. Where do you want to run them?
For those that haven't attended AWS reInvent, here's some advice. It's a really, really big show, expected to be well over 50,000 in attendance. And absolutely there will be news. There's lots going on in the keynotes, but the joke at last year's show actually was that when they had done a midnight launch party, that there were so many announcements coming from Amazon that they could have one of these every day of the year and there'd be something that people care about. So what should you focus on is come with a plan, know which one of the facilities you should be at, focus on those things, of course, meet with people, come by and see our team if you have a chance, and get the most out of it, because it is impossible to keep up with everything that Amazon is doing.
If you're going to be at reInvent, come by and see us at theCUBE. We've got four productions going on, 2 in the main stage in the main hall. And so definitely stop by and see us. If you're not going to be there, log on to thecube.net, check us out there, check out SiliconANGLE.com for all the news, and check out wikibon.com for all the research. Thanks for watching.
Once again, I want to thank James Urquhart for participating in this week's presentation of what we think are going to be some of the key issues that will come out of AWS reInvent 2018. Now let's move to the crowd chat. This is your opportunity to, again, share your ideas, ask your questions, engage your peers in the community about what you think is going to be important. Let's crowd chat.